You can smell it, but I don't know what it smells like. But it's been going on for 45 minutes. Fire department was over here telling us to stay back. I mean, it is just nasty smelling. Look at that.
Last Tuesday around 1 p.m. around the Cincinnati area, a train carrying a car full of styrene gas leaked into the environment in that community at the intersection of State Route 128 and United States 50, right on the Great Miami River. The train sits motionless here, but we'll get to that in a minute. A side note on US 50, I did a video on an abandoned Shoney's recently, and that highway stretches literally from coast to coast. It was built in just 4 years under Republican President Calvin Coolidge during the height of the Roaring Twenties. Now we posit whether this train leak of styrene could be yet another attack against a Republican President Trump, as his running mate J.D. Vance hails from nearby Middletown, Ohio. And I know nobody forgets the Norfolk Southern train derailment on 2323, February 3rd of 2023, where 7 hazardous chemicals were released just a quarter mile from the Pennsylvania state line. The cause there was a failed wheel bearing, mechanical in nature. Now, this latest train mishap on Tuesday, even though it wasn't deemed mechanical from the train car, it was deemed as a failure of the added stabilizer. And that was the likely culprit, is what officials are saying. So let's dig into this a little bit and see what we find. The location of the styrene leak is 5 miles from the Indiana border, 2 miles from the Kentucky state line, so again, you've got it real close to other states again, and 21 miles from Cincinnati, Ohio. The stabilizer just so happened to fail on the Great Miami River, as I said before, and like that Teflon dump into the Ohio River by the DuPont Company, as you guys remember from the podcast, or actually the film, Dark Waters, in the book by Aaron Brockovich, those of us in Parkersburg know all too well about the chemicals that are dumped in the Ohio River. So that's very important to know all that stuff, because Teflon has C8, and C8's in every single person in the world pretty much in their bodies. Now, schools were closed in the Whitewater Township area on Wednesday as a precaution, along with roads and businesses. And while styrene exposure might not seem that bad on the surface to you, it is yet another chemical that does induce cancer over long-term exposure. And some of these people are reporting in the area that they can still breathe it in the air. Local residents said that they could smell the chemical in Dent and Cheviot suburbs of Cincinnati, but not in Price Hill or Incline. One local resident who lives just 6 miles from the evacuation site said that they should have evacuated farther because he could taste it in the air. Now, by Wednesday morning, the train car had stopped venting the styrene, but fire crews had to keep it cool for fear of an explosion, and nobody wants to be near a train car as it explodes and implodes heavy metal, shrapnel all the way toward you. You would not survive it. Now, Mike Miller of Central Railroad of Indiana, he's the spokesman for them, and he says the train car is designed to vent styrene if it overheats, and thinks the additive stabilizer in the styrene became ineffective, which caused the styrene to overheat and vent.
To the most serious health concerns, now that they've all abated, some are starting to question who's responsible for yesterday's forced evacuation.
The WCPO9I team has been working on that today. And during our investigation, we learned about the class action lawsuit that was just filed today. I-Team reporter Dan Monk explains what else we learned.
It didn't take long for the Central Railroad of Indiana to address the question of blame.
Probable cause was that the additive stabilizer in the car became ineffective.
CEO Mike Miller said the rail car was not to blame.
I can only say what I know. The car worked exactly the way the car was designed. That car was supposed to vent versus explode, and that's what happened, so we believe the car was in good condition.
And he added the car and the styrene inside belonged to the Ineos plant in Addiston.
That tanker car is either owned or leased by the customer, and Ineos is the shipper of that commodity, so it's their car.
Ineos is a UK-based chemical company that bought the former Monsanto plant in 2007. 2 years later, it signed a $5.1 million consent decree with the U.S. EPA to address pollution problems at the Addiston plant. We reached out to Ineos but didn't get a response. In the meantime, local governments are keeping tabs on what they've spent for yesterday's incident, as I-Team reporter Paula Christian learned from Whitewater Township trustee Guy Scheibel.
But at some point, I'm sure the township's going to want to recoup the cost of what this has cost in overtime, in other costs. I mean, do you agree?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I guess as time goes on and you look at the responsibility, I guess we'll look into that as time. Really not put much thought into it at this point. The main focus right now is just getting it done, getting it secured, getting everybody back home, make sure everybody's healthy and there's no problems. And then we'll address anything else as we go down the road.
One thing is clear. The companies involved in this incident have deep pockets. Ineos operates in 29 countries with annual revenue of nearly $70 billion. And the Central Railroad of Indiana is owned by Brookfield Infrastructure Partners, whose publicly traded stock is worth more than $15 billion. In the newsroom, Dan Monk, WCPO 9, I-Team.
So Mike Miller couldn't elaborate on the stabilizer because Central Railroad of Indiana didn't own that chemical or the train. It just owned the rail yard that the train sat in. And that train car that had the problem, like they said, belonged to a company called Ineos. And it has a plant in nearby Addiston, which is just right there, 4 miles from where the chemical was released. He believed the train either may have been traveling to that plant, but then again it came out that it sat there 7 days, and they said that's kind of normal due to backlogs. So that's kind of what got people wondering during the 7 days, was that chemical being released? Because that next day, on Wednesday the 25th, the press conference was held where dozens of nearby residents showed up, claiming they began smelling that chemical days ago. So it's actually possible, for all we know, that train was there for the 7 days, like it really did come out that it was sitting there for 7 days. I mean, you saw it motionless on the video when they were spraying it down. And could it have been venting styrene maybe that entire time and nobody reported it? So Ineos, the multinational company, hasn't really responded much, but they did issue the statement saying, "We deeply regret the disruption and stress the situation has caused the local community. We're working closely with emergency services as we carry out a full investigation into the cause of the release of the styrene being transported." I think instead of an investigation from that company, we need federal regulators on the ground investigating this. We know about Monsanto owning the property before. They've had carcinogenic products. Styrene is carcinogenic. These are all the companies that Monsanto owns. So I just question everything. I mean, that's where we need to go with it.